Father Dave Tomaszycki, welcome to Power and Witness, and you've compiled a book on the demonic, and just give us a little thumbnail description of the book.
Okay, so Fulton Sheen in 1974 said he's going to write a book on the demonic. It never happened. But I went through his archives. I didn't find a book just sitting there, but I found a whole lot of material, all from that era, the 1974 era. So it looked like he was indeed getting his thoughts in order for a book on the demonic. I compiled it, I put it together. It's all in his words. I write the foreword to explain it. After that, it's all Fulton Sheen's words on the demonic, and it's so very relevant today.
Yeah. And his sources of writing that, or wanting to write that, what would that have been? Did he study it, or just his experiences? Or?
Mostly his experiences. He often doesn't list his sources. He just doesn't do that. He's a big-time Thomist. He's always going back to St. Thomas. He does quote Dr. Rollo May, who was a big psychologist back in the 60s and 70s. And Fulton Sheen takes some of Rollo May's thought from his book Love and Will from 1969, and Fulton Sheen builds upon it, gives it, explains it in a Christian way. Fulton Sheen always had a great way of seeing the arts, particularly literature, and pulling out, okay, what's going on. The arts have a way of showing philosophy before the philosophers catch on. And Fulton Sheen was excellent at seeing what was coming down the road for us. So he goes through some of that too. So those are some of his sources.
And let's, in your own interest, how did that come about?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of Fulton Sheen. I started reading him in 2009, and he just blew me away. So I couldn't get enough. So I think it was 2011. It was the summer of 2011. I was reading the book Those Mysterious Priests from 1974, and I saw this line. He says, "The demonic I shall treat in another book." So I thought, oh, okay, well, I look forward to reading that book. I didn't think too much of it. In 2016, 5 years later, I had read much more of Fulton Sheen, knew him, much better, and knew his chronology better too. So I reread the book Those Mysterious Priests, and I saw the line again, and by then I knew, okay, he never did write a book on this. So, part of me is just I felt like I just kind of owe it to Fulton Sheen as a fan of his, a follower of his. He meant to write this book. It'd be nice if we had it. And then as I started searching for it and going through things, it's just so relevant today that it's actually needed more today than when he was saying what he was saying. So and other people said, without my even prompting them, there's a reason why it didn't happen then, but it did happen now.
And what were some of the themes of his work, his writings, just in general, that you liked, his teachings?
So the main one is the cross. So his favorite subject is the Blessed Mother, and he writes beautifully about her. In my opinion, he's at his best when talking about the cross. And he has so many books named after the cross. The Cross and the Crisis, 7 words from the cross, 7 words to the cross. He's got his own stations of the cross. And then in his book, Life of Christ, which is his best book. Few would argue otherwise. Life of Christ is best book. The whole scenario is that the cross of Christ was in every single aspect of his life. And then in 1962 or 63, when his first book of the priesthood came out, he tried to show that in the life of the priest, of priest, as an alter Christus that crosses everywhere. And then in 1974, he writes another book on the priesthood and says hey, I tried to show this before, but I didn't do a good job. Let me do it again. So I think he's a master at explaining the cross, but it was never even enough for him. He always there's more he was trying to say. So it's really interesting getting into that. And he talks about the demonic being anti-cross, anti-discipline. The cross of Christ saves us, and so often we're brought to Jesus through our own crosses. And of course, the devil doesn't want us to be saved, doesn't want us to be brought to Jesus, doesn't want that unity that the cross brings about with it. So he's very anti-cross.
Wow. Yeah, I was telling you earlier, I had listened to it was a mid-70s retreat for priests, cassette tapes. It was in a big kind of plastic binder, and I was having this conversion experience after college. I remember just being in the car and listening to this, and I've never heard Catholic preaching. I guess I'd never heard any preaching like that. Yeah. And just some of those things he said, I remember just like got burned into my mind. And I started making the Holy Hour because he preached on that. And and it's amazing. Yeah, I just, I feel like just the impact he had on me. But, I what do you think of his being a speaker versus a writer? I mean, his ability, obviously, to speak was just like so incredible. I like what he did with his voice, like the whispers, the thundering, it's just like, it was like a Shakespearean actor,
Oh, yeah. So beyond the extraordinary grace God gave him and that came with his holiness, he definitely had a skill for it. Definitely. So that's an interesting question. Speaker versus a writer. It depends what he's speaking about or what he's writing about. So most people see his TV show and that's how they know him. And they see, oh, what an orator he is. And yes, that's true. But his TV show is not really a Catholic show. It's more of a philosophy show. It's Christian, but it's more of a philosophy show. His writings are Catholic and very profound. So I think in general, his writings are a step up from his TV show. Okay. But you mentioned his retreats. Well, those, of course, are very Catholic. But, in a live talk, he doesn't use notes, which spurs some amazing things. He'll go off on these beautiful tangents and whatnot, but you can't really go back and fix what you said. As a writer, he was much more fussy about just how things were laid out in this paragraph. Now I got to work on that sentence and whatnot. So I personally think his writings are even greater than his talks, and his talks are amazing, in my opinion.
And I wonder too, because I remember seeing some of the television, and to me it came out at a lower level than the talks I remember hearing. And I don't know if it was just because he was talking to priests, but I remember like the pregnant pause and everything. It was just completely drew you in.
Yeah.
And just you were in the moment, What's that? But he was amazing.
Yeah. And that skill is nice. The skill of rhetoric is very handy because in the end, okay, this is truth. How do you get it across? Well, rhetoric is to help get that truth across. And I tell people you ever have something where you got to strain to hear, strain to pay attention? Well, that's a pain. Right. Have you ever had it where, oh, sorry, I couldn't help but overhear you? Hey, I couldn't help but listen to what you were saying. And everyone has different level of skills, but I pray for us priests to have that level. It'd be very nice if people just couldn't help but pay attention when we're preaching.
Yeah, I was watching this documentary on the year 1968 in this country, and they had some of the politicians of the day, some excerpts. You think of a Martin Luther King, and it was I just thought, man, these guys were talented speakers. Yeah. I mean, and I'm wondering if we've really lost that more than we think, that today. And
years ago, I read a few books on preaching. And one of them, so he was a Protestant saying how bad Protestant preaching is. And he said, I don't know the Catholics, but us Protestants, we're not good at preaching. And in the end, he gave a solution. And his solution was to write things by hand. And at the time, it's really? At the end of a whole book? That's all you offer, But the more I go through life, there's something about that. There's something about the computer where you can just blah, and then I'll go back and fix it. Let's look at this. Versus to write something by hand, you have to have a lot more in mind, a lot more structure in mind right from the go. And I think there's something about that. And I've not listened to much of Martin Luther King Jr., but I have read his autobiography, and some of his speeches are in there. And he was a wonderful rhetorician. He knew how to use rhetoric,
Yeah, you can go on YouTube and play his stuff. He's got one But If Not, I think that's what his title, but it's about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I remember somebody told me about it, and I was preaching on it, and I think I listened to it after I preached on it. It was oh my gosh. I mean, just from the word go, just grabbing people's attention. And then even his theology, he talked about the quality of their faith, and it was it was a distinction that I didn't make in my thing. And it was but it was, I don't know if that comes up.
And some of it's cultural and some of it's Protestant. So one of my good priest friends, I served with him a few years ago. He grew up Protestant, and he went to Protestant seminary, and they were taught, okay, like a 15-minute build-up, okay, 15-minute plateau, and 15 minutes of coming back down. That's a 45-minute sermon, In Catholic seminary, we are not taught that. So some of it is a context thing.
Yeah. Could you say a little bit more about the cross? Because I do remember things he said in that priest retreat. Yeah. There's that funny story where the priest wanted the crucifixes taken down in the rectory, and the housekeeper said, okay, if we do that, then you'll not be served your meals. I will not do the housekeeper was going to go on strike. Mm-hmm. And then he said, the very next day the crucifix was put back up. He said, He goes like, I guess the cost was just too high, or something like that.
That just sounds like Fulton. So he explains it. In the Old Testament, there was the priest, and he offered up the lamb. He offered up the sacrifice, the victim. So the priest slaughters the lamb. So that's two separate things: priest, lamb. And then Jesus Christ comes. He is the high priest. Oh, and he is the Lamb of God. He is priest and he is victim. He goes to the cross. And even aside from religion, just the discipline in life. If you want to go anywhere in life, you got to have some discipline, But spiritually speaking, even more so, because again, we're saved through Jesus' cross. We get to him through our own crosses. And he talks about how with the cross comes unity. So God unites and the devil divides. At his heart, the devil is anti-cross because he's anti-unity. But the cross unites. The cross unites us to Jesus if we choose to accept it. And if we choose not to accept it, it unites us like away from Jesus. So it's always a figure of unity in one way or another. A big thing, especially for priests, is priest. Hey, you're both priest and victim. In seminary, we talk about I'll be a priest, and we're ordained a priest. You don't really talk about, I'm going to be a victim, I'm going to be ordained a victim. But that's exactly what you are. Yeah. And that's the only way to offer up the Mass. That's the only way to live the Mass, too. So a more practical example. Fulton Sheen, there's a 30-minute YouTube clip about him explaining the Mass. It's very beautiful. But he says, the three parts of the liturgy of the Eucharist. The offertory, you are offered up. The consecration, you're set on the altar, and what happens on an altar? You die. Communion, you receive the life of Christ insofar as you've given up your life. So to offer the Mass well, to participate in Mass well as a layman, it's the cross, it's death. And sometimes I'll preach that, and I'll tell that story, and I'll say, and what I want from you at this Mass is to die. I want you to die, because the more you die, the more you pick up Christ, the more room Christ has to come in and live in you. But that's only through the cross. It's only through death. The seed has to die to sprout up to new life.
Yeah.
And our God is all about life. He's a God of life. And the devil, he's a God with a lowercase g of death. No cross, no life, no love, death.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the point you make about the salvation and uniting us. Because I know I often quote the passage from John 12 that when I'm lifted up, I'll draw all men to myself, speaking the manner of death. So that at the heart of the kingdom, the heart of that calling together of his people, of being joined to him, is the cross.
Yeah, and so in the book on the demonic, the devil's against the cross, and Fulton Sheen always interprets the temptations in the desert of Satan to our Lord as three temptations against the cross. You're going to unite people, you're going to draw people to yourself when you're lifted up on the cross. No, hey, that's no fun. I'll show you a better way. And every temptation, through turning stones into bread, feeding their bellies, entertainment, throw yourself down from this pinnacle, politics, chase after worldly power. I hold the world in my hands, worship me. It's all
these kingdoms will be yours.
All these kingdoms, but it's all shortcuts away from the cross.
Yeah.
And as the devil, he tells half-truths, there's truth to that. If you entertain people, you'll get people to walk into your church door. but they won't stay. It'll just be a revolving door, you know. And as a priest, if you want your homily to go viral, get political. People will get interested. You'll make some fans, but it won't save anyone,
Right.
you know. So like, yeah, as the devil says, the people will come to you, but they won't be saved, and that's what the devil wants, to not be saved.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. His teaching on the demonic. Is that the biggest one? Well, the other thing I wanted to say too, I remember in the tape to a priest, he's got, the crowd, I forgot at what point in the gospel, they said, they stand at the religious leaders at the foot, come down off that cross and we'll believe.
Yeah.
I just remember listening to that for the first time. It's like anything but the cross,
Yeah, we'll believe in anything. There's no cross.
Right.
That's in the book.
Yeah.
So this book, I was going through trying to find what does Fulton Sheen say about the demonic, and I wanted to put everything in the book. Okay. But then, he's in the 70s, the retreat that you listened to, he was going around, he's traveled around the world giving that retreat, versions of that retreat. And we have about 4 or 5 of those retreats recorded on tape. And actually, I have some old cassette tapes myself, and I had to get a cassette player and transfer it to the computer, and there's a whole lot that I had to do. But a lot of them are also on the Fulton Sheen app too, or in his audio library online. So I would go through, and I found, like 5 talks on the demonic. And I go, oh, wow, there we go. That's 5 chapters in the book. Then I listened to him. It's like, well, it's all the same talk, just different versions of it. And he didn't use notes. So he could give a pretty different version of the same talk. So I'm like, man, if you were to just print one of them, like you're going to be missing some gems from the others. If you print them all, it's going to be very repetitious. So what do you do? So what I would do is I would have them all transcribed. And a half an hour talk would usually take me about 6 hours to transcribe. And then I'd go through and I would find the one where I like this flow the best. So I'd, first theme, second theme, third theme. I'd go through all the themes of it, and I'd make a whole list. And then I'd go through the other talks. Okay, he opens the same way. Oh, this is different here. Oh, it's the 5th theme already. And I would label them out that way. And if I was moving fast, it would take me about a month to get them all transcribed and ready to go. And then on my day off, I'd lay out all the talks on my bedroom floor, and I'd take the whole day splicing it together like, oh, it's a great story, can't miss this. Oh, this paragraph here. And sometimes it would be like, this half a sentence is perfect and that half a sentence is perfect, and I'd splice it together like that. So that's how a number of the chapters of the book came together. Again, so it's all Fulton Sheen's words. Mm-hmm. Now, some other chapters were I lifted from lifted, that sounds like I stole. Not quite. But I got them from his diocesan paper. In 1969 in particular, he really started writing about the demonic in his diocesan paper when he was the Bishop of Rochester. And that was actually his last year as the Bishop of Rochester. And then some chapters, one chapter is taken from Life of Christ, and then some other chapters are made up from different articles he wrote in the 70s and whatnot. So that's what went into the book. Again, it's all his words, and that's a bit of how it was compiled, without getting into any content yet, but yeah.
And wasn't like the whole Rochester experience for him as bishop there, that was kind of an intense sharing in the cross.
Oh yeah, definitely. He was there just under 3 years, but even going there was part of the cross. So him and Cardinal Spellman, they bumped heads numerous times, and the last time was, Fulton Sheen was bringing in, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars through his fame and TV show to go to the missions. Because while he was on his TV show, he was the auxiliary bishop of New York and head of the propagation of the faith for New York. So it's basically head of the propagation of the faith for America. So he's using his fame to raise all sorts of money for the missions and telling people, hey, this money's going to the missions. And then the last straw, him and Cardinal Spellman bumped heads a few times, but the last straw was Cardinal Spellman wanted to tax that money that was going to the missions. And Fulton Sheen said, no, the people think it's going to the missions, it's going to the missions. And that was 1966, so that's when he lost his TV show and got moved to Rochester. And he was 71. It's odd to become the bishop of a diocese at 71 years old,
right.
But that's when he went to Rochester. And yeah, so just going there was the cross. But while he was there, I mean, that's when Martin Luther King Jr. got assassinated. I think that's when Robert Kennedy got assassinated. There's a lot of turmoil. He was there when Humanae Vitae came out. And it was interesting. So I went through all his diocesan papers of while he was there. And it's amazing when you look at history. Most bishops went against the Pope with Humanae Vitae, you know. So two of the bishops that stayed with the Pope was Fulton Sheen and Cardinal Wojtyła, the future John Paul II. They stayed strong when it came to birth control. So he's in Rochester, New York, and I knew he always stayed strong. But as you go through the papers, Humanae Vitae comes out, and like the next week, in the paper are a whole bunch of articles against it. And I'm like, I can't believe Fulton Sheen would put up with this nonsense. 2 weeks later, they're all fired. He didn't put up with that nonsense.
Yeah.
But it was a constant fight, you know. Yeah. And he, so he has said stuff that's very much like what Pope Benedict has said. Like people read the media when they should have read the documents, you know. Right. And Pope Benedict says like there's two Vatican IIs, the one that actually happened and the one the media reported. And I tell people all the time, the media does not have the eyes of faith, you know. They're dumb. They cannot know the faith. So to follow them, to learn the faith from them is double dumb, you know, but many people do it. He goes there. It's the cross just to go there while he's there trying to implement Vatican II. He's trying to do it the right way. There's a lot of crazies. The silly season after Vatican II, he's fighting all that almost single-handedly, you know. Yeah. And he's in his early 70s, and it was very, very tough. And honestly, he wasn't always the most practical. Like some of his ideas, you look at them, it's like, ooh, that's a saintly idea. To do it's going to be a little tough. You know, he wasn't always the most tactical and practical about that.
And then, I mean, that area too was kind of like noted for liberals. Like after that, you had Bishop Clark and Hubbard, right? And then they were different New York dioceses, I think. I don't remember where they were.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. So you think that spirit was up there that, that he would have to.
But it was, So nowadays, most of the bishops are quite united. Most of them are very united. Back then, it was very tumultuous. And it was it's like Pope Paul VI, John Paul II, and Fulton Sheen versus everyone. It's a little exaggeration, but only a little. Yeah.
What are so we mentioned the cross, but there's some other teachings on the devil that, like principles of how he operates? Or...
Yeah. So he gives three main signs of the demonic. He gives other signs too, but there's three main signs. But to even understand the signs, so the devil he always twists things. He's kind of like an ape of Christ, you know. That's one of the ways Fulton Sheen puts it. So it's always a twist. It's the half-truth. When you go to the Garden of Eden, look in Genesis, and just the way the devil repeats God's words to Eve, you go, well, that's pretty close. It's like, it's close enough to confuse me. Yeah, what did God say? You start getting confused, and Eve got confused, you know. So you have to understand the signs of the demonic through that confusion. So the first sign is a love of nudity. Okay, so the human body is good. We know that John Paul II wrote so beautifully of it, all the art, and, you know, the Catholic art in the past centuries and whatnot. The human body, beautiful. Yes. Okay. But the devil twists everything. So what would it take to get back to the Garden of Eden, where everyone is naked and unashamed? Well, there'd have to be no lust in our hearts. We would have to basically be made perfect, be back in heaven. And to get to heaven, you have to go through the cross, the flaming sword that protects the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve left. So Jesus Christ will take us back to the Garden of Eden through the cross, through perfection, through having our hearts crucified to be like him, modeled after his sacred heart. We'll get there if we follow Jesus, if we follow him to the cross. The devil says, no cross. You know what? I'll take you to the Garden of Eden. You can have all that, just no cross. And the devil takes us to the demonic version of the Garden of Eden, which is, again, the twist. It's the pornography, the eroticism, the perversion that's so it's everywhere in our culture today. Yeah. So that's the first sign of the demonic. The second,
I was thinking too, like when Jesus in Matthew's gospel, says, "Who do the people say that I am?" Peter is revealed. The Father reveals to him, you're the Christ, but then he immediately, he gets a passion prediction, tries to dissuade Christ from going to, and he refers to him as Satan. Jesus calls,
because he tempts him from the cross.
Yeah.
No, I won't let this happen to you.
Yeah, that's so powerful. You think about it. It's like, I always think like Peter's like, he's like singled out with this great.
He's just named the Pope. 2 verses later, he's called Satan. It's like, whoa. Yeah. And it's amazing. So, like, I tell you what, when people complain about homilies and they have like, oh, but Jesus would never. Have you read the Gospels, man?
Yeah. Okay, so the second point then?
The second sign of the demonic is violence. So again, there's a good form, and then there's the demonic form. So the good form is, and I already touched on it, it's the sword pointed inward, as Fulton Sheen calls it, which crucifies the heart to make it Christ-like. Okay. When we don't do that, we will turn the sword outward and we'll crucify anything else. We'll start doing violence to our brother, to our neighbor, to anything else. We'll do violence to the church. Oh, the church needs to change its teachings to be more like how I live my life. We start making things in our image after our likeness. So in the end, like, we're made in the image and likeness of God. That's amazing. The devil twists it. And he gives us this inspiration to want to make everything in our image after our likeness. And we have to do violence to make that happen. It's kind of like, and this actually touches on the third point too, but like men and women are different. We have a culture that says it believes in diversity. And if you point out the differences, the diversity between men and women, you get shot down. It's like, hold on, I thought you guys were pro-diversity. What's going on?
Yeah.
So in the culture, like when you take men and women and try to make them the same thing, you have to break at least one of them. Usually you break both of them. But again, that's a violence done while we're trying to make things in our image after our likeness instead of following God. So then that touches on the third sign of the demonic. And Fulton Sheen uses like a different term every time he names it. In the book, we call it schizophrenic mentality. That is one of the terms he uses. But the disjointed mind, the breaking apart, the loss of identity. It's that type of thing. So at its heart, so God unites and the devil divides. And really every sign of the demonic is some form of division somewhere. But the schizophrenic, the loss of identity, that's like the big one. When we step away from Jesus, we only know who we are through him. So when we step away from him, we're going to scatter ourselves, going in all directions, looking for some identity, some meaning somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's used like in the gay movement today. It's like,
oh, huge.
Like they're saying like this is your identity, and some of the people in the church even like are stressing this identity. And the natural conclusion is, well, if this is my identity, why can't I act on it?
Yeah. Okay, so it's got that third sign of the demonic, and oftentimes that identity is actually in a perversion. Okay, that's the second sign of the demonic. And then like there's violence at the act itself, the domestic abuse among partners, the surgeries and hormones and stuff for transgenderism, like that's violence. So it's got all three signs of the demonic big time.
Yeah. Because I remember him saying, even the word diabolic means like to cut through.
Diaboline, to tear apart, to rend asunder. Yeah. It's always a split. And you think of all the D words: diabolic, devil, damnation, destroy, decay, division, divorce. Yeah.
And I remember Pope Benedict saying, too, how violence is always the tool of the Antichrist.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Fulton Sheen, he gives some other like smaller signs of the demonic, and they're often some form of violence. So he talks about the anti-hero. And he talks about, so like good is good, evil is evil, and of course the devil twists things. So like the Pope, he should be the good guy. He should just by default be the good guy. But then people in the media, even sometimes sadly in our Catholic media, they start criticizing the Pope. And now I'm the good guy, I'm the hero because I'm criticizing the Pope? Well, that's anti-hero. That's a sign of the demonic, but that's also a form of violence. And Fulton Sheen talks about the destruction of persons, more on an individual level. Like, so he's writing in the 60s, Vietnam War era, that type of thing. Yes, we're out at war spilling our brother's blood. He writes about that. But also he foresees there's going to be more and more of this destruction of individual persons, which we see with abortion, and he talks about that, and we see in our cancel culture today.
Yeah. And you remind me too that identity, discovering who we are, is in Jesus Christ, and that's our true identity. Now, what a powerful point that made is in Gaudium et Spes, right? That it's only in the Word or through the Word made flesh that we discover, who we're called to be.
And of course, Fulton Sheen was writing before Gaudium et Spes, but he's making that same point. Mm-hmm. So there's a chapter, so each of the signs of the demonic gets its own chapter. And in the chapter on the schizophrenic mentality, the loss of identity, Fulton Sheen, even though this is a book on the demonic and it talks a lot about the demonic, his eyes really are on Jesus. So even when he gives the sign of the demonic, halfway through, he's back talking about Jesus. So with the schizophrenic mentality, halfway through, he's talking about pride, how pride separates us from God, and how we need humility, and the only ways is to go back to Jesus. That's where we find our true identity, is only through him.
Yeah. And in the garden, the fact that the serpent goes to Eve first, I know that church fathers had some explanations for this. Did he ever write about that? Why did he?
I can't think of him ever writing specifically about that.
Because you think Adam's the head of the human race. You think he'd want to take down Adam. Paul refers to him as the head. Yeah. And I know Thomas maintained that. But it's interesting because it does, we say that Mary, Scripture speaks of Jesus as the new Adam. I'd say Paul does, but it doesn't mention Mary as the new Eve. The church fathers did, but it does allow for, I think, this role of Mary in redemption. That's very important.
So, Fulton Sheen, as far as I know, doesn't speak specifically about that very specific thought. But you can see it in his writing. So his very last episode in his first season on TV, he was talking about communism and capitalism. And he says how communism is the vulture on the dead carcass of capitalism. Okay, so it's not like capitalism's going great, in swoops communism, there's something going wrong somewhere. It is dying, it dies, starts to rot, the vulture of communism comes in. I do wonder, because he does make some comments on just the blurring of the lines of the sexes and whatnot, this unisex culture that we're heading toward. He mentions that. I found that in some handwritten notes of his. There is why have women kind of taken over so many things today? Did women just jump up and take over? Or were the men dying and okay, now the women just gotta take control here? So if you go back to the Garden of Eden, what was Adam doing? We don't know exactly what he was doing, but we do know he was not guarding his wife. Right. She was not protected at that instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know Scott Hahn emphasizes that point. Yeah. I think there's something in the text that suggests that too. Mm-hmm. What are some of the beautiful things he said about Mary? You mentioned how he wrote a lot about her.
Yeah. That was his favorite subject. And it was really cool putting this book together. The vast majority of the content is from the last dozen years of his life. So you're seeing his matured thoughts. And even stuff where, he's got this whole radio address on communism and the Antichrist from 1947. I don't use too much from that particular talk in the book because he developed it later. And I go later in his life, get the more developed thoughts on those subjects, and that's what's in the book. So his third weapon against the demonic is Mary, the mother of Jesus, the mother of God. And that's almost the entirety of a talk he gave in 1976, 3 years before he died. I think it was August 6th of 1976, at the 41st International Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia. And so his main thing there, so it's a Eucharistic Congress, so he's talking about the relationship between Jesus and Mary. If you're going to break into a tabernacle and steal the Eucharist. Who's the tabernacle? It's Mary. You know, how people deface Mary on their way to defacing Jesus, and how they're in it together. And at the end of the talk, so it very beautifully is like his mature thought. It's kind of a summary of like all his thought on Mary, all in one talk. And at the end, he gets into the demonic, and he even says it was preparing for that particular talk that he made some last connections between Mary and her fight against the demonic.
Mm. It seems like exorcists talk about that, you know, calling upon Mary, her intercession in exorcisms.
Yeah. So we see her, and she's alluded to in Genesis. She, of course, is throughout the Gospels. She's always with Jesus. She's got the sword to the heart, the 7 swords of Mary. And then in Revelation 2, she's talked about there. And she fights for her children. She battles out in the wilderness like Jesus went out to the desert to fight Satan. But yeah, she's there for us. She fights. She's one of the big weapons against the demonic.
Mm. So that was in, you know, somebody pointed that out recently at that Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia. I think you had Cara Wojtyla, you had Mother Teresa, you had Dorothy Day, I think, and Fulton Sheen speaking. I mean, that's a tough act to follow, you know.
Yeah. And you know what? So in my research, so I found a couple transcripts of that talk. So that's what I have for the book. I couldn't find the audio, and I looked, but he has stuff from a Eucharistic Congress in 1935. We have the audio for. But we don't have the audio from his talk in 1976. But I've asked around. I can't find it. I have transcripts, so that's good enough, but I've never been able to find that audio.
Yeah. What do you think today? I mean, he lived in a very tumultuous time, but I mean, today, to me, as I said, I was just watching this documentary of '68, and I said, yeah, there's this big anti-war movement, and you know, some of it at times violent, and you know, all this political upheaval, assassinations, and all that kind of stuff. But in some ways, I look at it and say, it just seems like a simpler time. You know, I mean, it's like
it was a much simpler time.
I mean, now the complexity of everything just seems so much more confused.
It's not good. So in the 70s, he was talking about. He said the best way to get things done is to know what to leave undone. You know, and I tell people. It's interesting. Oh, the questions us priests get, is the Pope going to? It's I don't know. He doesn't consult me. I don't care. The best way to care about the right things is to know what to not care about. Okay, but to your point, there's just way more stuff not to do, way more stuff not to care about. How do you sort it all out? And he does mention that in the 70s. So the last chapter in the book is about fighting the demonic with the holy hour. It comes from a number of talks he gave, some to the priests, the talks you're referring to. Some parts of those are in there. And one of the main reasons he gives is we're just so scatterbrained, we're so busy. When you walk into the holy hour, your mind's going everywhere. You're schizophrenic yourself, you know, and it takes time just to put yourself in the Lord's presence. And he was saying that 50 years ago, before the cell phone and before the internet. We're crazy today.
Black and white television, 3 channels basically on the television.
Yeah.
I know. I think about that with Mother Angelica. You know, she finished the shrine at the end of 1999, and she wanted that. You go up there today. There's this big white fence leading into the drive and on the property, and then a big piazza. She wanted people to walk across, all to look at something beautiful as you come in, the countryside, the beautiful fence, the piazza, you know, so you couldn't pull up to the front door of the shrine and just spill out and go into the church. It was like this chance to detach from the world, you know. Yeah. And I thought, how prophetic, because now it's all on steroids and
but he talks about that type of stuff. He calls the world, it's like an octopus with its tentacles reaching out to you. And again, that's before the cell phone. And now it's for so many people, the cell phone is too far away. They have to have it on their wrists, you know, because reaching in their pocket to see their text is too much work. We need the world closer and louder. Yeah, it's scary. Honestly, it's very scary. I think most of us priests don't realize how loud our hearts are, how deaf we are to the Lord, and we're supposed to be leading the people. Yeah. It's scary. I encourage people all the time, turn it off. Get off of social media, get off of the news, turn it off, and go sit in front of the Lord.
Yeah. And what are some of the things, maybe just about, what would he recommend with the holy hour, maybe for lay people.
Yeah. So throughout his life, he recommended the holy hour, especially to priests.
Mm-hmm.
And in his early days, he says, "Oh, the holy hour, it's good. You might want to try it." By the end of his life, he was telling priests, "You need to be doing a holy hour
Yeah.
every day, without exception."
Yeah.
He would tell sisters, "Do a holy hour every day." And he would say, "It can include the Mass." For priests, it does not include the Mass. For sisters, it can include the Mass. For laity, he'd say, "Do at least 15 minutes every day. It can include the Mass, but silence is number one. You got to be in silence. It's great if you can be in the real presence. That's huge. Not everyone lives next to a church. So in silence with the Scriptures, if you're not in the real presence of our Lord in front of a crucifix." Those are like his main concrete things. So silence, Scriptures, crucifix, or the Eucharist.
Yeah. And, of course, he was like such a witness of fidelity to it, and, just never missing one, like for 50 years or something.
Yeah.
But, interesting to me as well is that he's from Illinois, right? The Diocese of Peoria.
El Paso, Illinois, a
El
little
Paso.
town, yep.
And he spends a chunk of his life in New York City. And
About 25 years of his life, at least, yeah.
Yeah. And how did that affect him? What do you think he drew from that? Or how did that form him, you think?
I've never specifically thought of that. So he went there in 1951. He was already 56 years old. He had spent a lot of time in D.C., spent a lot of time overseas, so he was already quite formed by then. But yeah, he went there. He was toughened up with his fights with Cardinal Spellman and whatnot. And it's amazing, he had that huge audience, and then he was going and anointing people, and he was catechizing people on the side, and so he was in New York for 15 years as an auxiliary. Then he goes to Rochester. Then he comes back to New York for the last 10 years of his life as he was an archbishop by title. He wasn't the Archbishop of New York. He was Archbishop by title the last 10 years of his life. And even when he was in the hospital, he was catechizing people, bringing them into the church while he's dying, But he early in his life, so he grew up a farm boy, and he hated farm work, and he wasn't good at farm work. He was extremely bright intellectually, and I think the city suited him better for his own style, for his own strengths and whatnot. So I think it let him be the priest that he was made to be.
Yeah. Did he? I know there's a famous picture of him, right, with John Paul II, or he met him, didn't he?
October of 1978, 2 months before before Fulton Sheen passes away. And John Paul II says, "You're a loyal son of the church. You have written and spoken well of our Lord." Could you imagine that? A saint, a Pope saint telling you are a loyal son of the church.
Yeah.
Oof, yeah.
And Benedict spoke well. I heard he said something too about what's the holdup on the canonization. I forgot how he said it, but I remember there was some statement he made that he.
Yeah, I don't know what's with the holdup, but all in good time.
Yeah. Father Dave, thank you so much for chatting with us and sharing these great ideas and thoughts.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.